Sports Professor Rick Horrow, into the $1.3 trillion business of sports. You're on the record. A tremendous event, the 5th annual Palm Beach CorpGov Forum with New York Stock Exchange, Goldman Sachs, and other key participants happened 2 weeks ago. A number of investment bankers, equity formation, private capital, everybody was there representing big and small companies alike, talking about the traditional finance structures. I was lucky enough to moderate the sports panel on the forum, talking about sports in South Florida, but also the future trends post-pandemic, the fun season that's really the Roaring 20s, not the 1920s when the Spanish flu was recovering, sports was used, public finance of stadiums, radio recovery, and all to justify coming out of, at that time, the worst pandemic in the history of the country. 100 years later, the Spanish flu gives way to COVID, and sports infrastructure development, one of the examples. Creativity, cooperation, survival of the fittest, all key. And one of the things that was very important is how the state of Florida survived and merged with some of the history and their infrastructure, but it's a national trend. And two very important guests I was able to have as part of the panel. Mike Alford, the athletic director at Florida State. We've had him on from our perspective. He's been with Dallas Cowboys, the California Angels, other teams all over the country, Cincinnati Bengals, and before he became an athletic director in Michigan, Central Michigan, and then coming up from the booster side of the business, athletic director at Florida State. Bob Dupuy, the COO, the president, the commissioner of Major League Baseball for at least a decade, started Major League Baseball Advanced Media, and developed the situation where all of the major issues, including new stadium development, revenue sharing issues that were being discussed, obviously very important as we deal with private equity down the road. The professional leagues and their perspective with Bob Dupuy from baseball, football, and everyone else, and the college sports perspective from one of the more enlightened athletic directors out there today. Certainly a panel worth listening to and fun to moderate and fun to deal with. Here are some of the most important points now.
John started the clock, so that means every second is one that we lose, and we got a hell of a lot to cover here in the next 29 minutes and 48 seconds. So indulge me. In a $1.3 trillion sports industry, you'll hear from Mike Alford, the athletic director at Florida State University Seminoles, and Bob Dupuy, who was the president and CEO of Major League Baseball for 9 years, and being involved in baseball for well over 100 years. So, stoic. Sorry about that. He'll get me later. The bottom line is this is a tremendous industry, and it's one of a kind that impacts everybody. Just to give you some perspective, this is the first ticket ever to a Miami Dolphin game. You knew that they were supposed to win the Super Bowl on a regular basis after being undefeated in 1972. They forgot to read the memo. And so at the end of the day, they're still worth, depending on whether you believe Forbes, Sportico, or otherwise, $11 billion, including the asset of the stadium, the tennis facility, and the racetrack. South Florida has been, just to kind of highlight some of this, a Wild West-oriented place on how to get a facility and franchises done. I became the first executive director of the Miami Sports Authority when I was 25, and I feel like I've aged 9 million years since then. South Florida is a very thin generational community. People come from Havana from the south and New York from the north, and very rarely set up long-term roots here. So if you want to build facilities as an opportunity for community infrastructure, you ought to go somewhere else. Nevertheless, this ticket was from the 1966 Miami Dolphins, lucky enough to sit through the award of the Panthers, award of the Marlins, and put together, as the head of the Miami Sports Authority, very quickly a story, Miami Heat. Ted Arison, the then owner of Carnival Cruise Lines, Mickey has run it and has been the Heat's guy since day one, went to New York with me to meet David Stern, commissioner of the NBA at the time. Ted Arison admitted that a basketball, to him, he didn't know whether it was stuffed or blown up, but he knew that it was good for Miami, South Florida, and obviously his cruise line. He went to David Stern and said, how much? David Stern said, well, you know, we're committing a franchises at the same time to Orlando and to Charlotte and to Minneapolis, and so we only wanted 3. So we're not sure we want you, even if you want us. Franchise price is $37.5 million. No, 32.5. $5 million more than he paid. $32.5 million. To which Ted Arison politely said goodbye, got up and walked out. And I was left to meet with David Stern to talk about the weather, the playoffs, and arenas. David then said, you know, you're wasting your time. You don't need to convince me of anything. The guy I'm taking the meeting with is walking down the street. 7 of the longest minutes of my life. Guy comes back, and he says, Mr. Commissioner, I went across the street to buy an NBA franchise. But guess what? They don't sell them across the street. The only place I can buy them is right here. To which he immediately took out his checkbook, wrote a no terms, $32.5 million check, and that's how the Heat was born. We know that because I was in the room. Bottom line was, talk about equity investment and capital, they're worth, again, Sportico or otherwise, $5 to $6 billion, depending on what you call it. Ironically, 50 years ago, almost today, George Steinbrenner buys the Yankees for $5 million. The Walter Group gets approved 50 years later, ironically, for the Lakers purchase for $10 billion. Something's going on. The end of the day, sports is a highly visible, highly controversial, global, diverse organization, and there's nothing like it, except March 11, 2020, when Rudy Gobert goes down to Oklahoma City from the Jazz and tests positive for COVID, the world shuts down. But the ACC basketball tournament shuts down after round 1. Players' Championship shuts down, on and on and on. And it took about 1.3 million jobs with it. Slowly coming back, Cowboys worth about $3 billion at that time, now worth over 11, though clearly not on the field. NIL, about $3 billion or so. NFL TV, $111 billion. You know, that's a check for $111 billion in your mailbox. Bottom line is, COVID created 3 things. Creativity, born out of necessity, positivity, born out of natural selection, and cooperation, born out of urgency. Now we're in the roaring 20s, not the 1920s when the Spanish flu epidemic caused public-private partnerships to build the Orange Bowl and otherwise, believe it or not, check your history books, but another kind of roaring 20s, filled with globalization, esports, payments and currency, Web 3.0, venues, all of those important trends. And one of the most important trends, more than anything else, is equity, capital, newfound investment. How do you do it? Where do you do it? And that's one of the things we want to talk about today for the next 24 minutes and 9 seconds. So to start, Bob Dupuy, one of the most important people in Major League Baseball, in all seriousness, the CEO and president, from March 2002 through 2010. 18 years, he was the chief legal officer. He started MLB Advanced Media, which is very important as far as the equity situation is concerned. Foley and Lardner Sports and Entertainment partner. He was Bud Selig's personal attorney with the Brewers, asked him to come to New York and run baseball, and the rest is basically history. But Bob has a great perspective, just as Mike has on the amateur side, on the professional side. So Bob, let's talk about the equity situation and the private dollar investment portfolio from baseball, but also all other pro sports.
Thank you, Rick. Most of that was right, not entirely. But what was right is his comment about the ROI from sports. At least in baseball, In the 100 years, only one franchise has ever sold for less than it was purchased for, and the return has been fairly significant. And I'm delighted to be here because basically I'm here with only good news. The first is for those of you who have been lucky enough to have invested in baseball already, attendance is up. The ratings for the World Series and the playoffs were up dramatically, even though it's hard to track the Blue Jays ratings through Canada. And everything looks pretty good for the sport, at least until the end of next season when the labor deal runs out. The second reason, and those of you who care about this subject are already aware, the leagues have loosened up dramatically over the last 5 years in terms of private equity being invested in clubs. And oddly enough, baseball was the first to do that in 2019. And impose some limitations. A team can only sell 30% to private equity. No one fund can have more than 15%. It's got to be a term of at least 5 years. It's got to be a passive investment. But funds can invest in multiple teams. And the last time I looked, I think there are 10 teams that have availed themselves of that. And the other leagues followed suit, and the numbers are roughly the same. The NFL, which has always been reluctant to involve corporate money, is limited to 10% rather than the 15%, and hockey is 20%, NBA is 20%. But otherwise, it has to be passive, and the same sorts of restrictions that I have talked about. The other thing I wanted to say is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's nothing particularly new here. With the exception of the NFL, all of the leagues have had corporate involvement or ownership for decades. In baseball's case, some of the corporations that own teams were frankly excellent owners and stewards of the game. Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis was a fabulous owner. We had Nintendo in Seattle, and actually a foreign-based company, that owned the Seattle Mariners for years and ran them well. We've had a bunch of media companies that have owned teams, the Tribune Company, Liberty Media, Turner, Fox, Disney, Rogers up in Canada, and all of those that have worked reasonably well, in part because there have been two issues that have been dealt with and are dealt with in the case of private equity investing as well, and that is accountability and integrity. In the case of accountability, the sports have always wanted, because what you sell is the integrity of the competition on the field, the sports have always wanted one person who is accountable to the league, who is accountable to the commissioner, who the commissioner can pick up the phone and call when there is an issue. In basketball, it's called the governor. In baseball, it's called the control person. It's usually the person with the most significant investment, but not always. In baseball, we at one point had co-owners, co-control people, Nelson Doubleday and Fred Wilpon with the Mets. And based on the way that worked out, I don't think we'll try that again anytime soon. But the corporations, would appoint a control person who had to be approved by the commissioner and then had to be approved by the owners. The issue there is that the control person was always susceptible to being fired by the corporation, and the only real control MLB had there was that they had the right to approve any replacement control person. That leads to the second, which is the integrity issue, is you really don't want to have owner control more than one club because of the image that could portray if there were trades, et cetera. Very few of you in this room are old enough to remember, but back when the Yankees had their great run in the 50s and the 60s, Kansas City was essentially a holding tank for them. When they needed a player, they went, to the Kansas City A's. That's where they got Roger Maris. That's where they got Clete Boyer. That's where they got Ralph Terry. That's where they got Bobby Shantz, all of whom were key elements in their run of championships. So I think there are continuing opportunities with regard to private equity we can talk about, whether it's stadium development, whether it's all the ancillary development like the Battery. But so far as I think the 4 leagues are concerned, great, and look forward to it continuing.
Thank you, Bob, as always. Mike Alford is the poster child for diversity. When you think of diversity in employment, Bob covered the professional side. Mike has covered the professional side, but his current position. Any ACC people here? Where? What schools? All right. Well, there you go. See? All right. So, and FSU? Any other FSU? FSU? Wow. Okay. Yeah, you don't count. So, Mike has been the athletic director at the Florida State University since December 9, 2021. And that's important. But what is also important is he got his communications degree at UAB, his master's at Arkansas, then cut his teeth at Alabama. He spent time with the Cowboys, $400 million of contractual revenue, University of Oklahoma under the famed Joe Castiglione, Southern Cal, now we know California Angels as well, Cincinnati Bengals, Central Michigan as the AD in 2017 to 2020. I kiddingly say he can't hold a job. I seriously say the man is incredibly experienced, not just how different teams and leagues deal with situations, but he spearheaded the $265 million Doak Campbell renovation, which opened up this year as a real estate play at Florida State. I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to set you up to talk about the whole private equity world. So, Mike, go.
Well, I appreciate that, and it is a unique position we are in at Florida State. Coming in, and what really attracted me to coming to Florida State was just not being an athletic director. I have 21 sports, 17 head coaches, $220 million budget that is self-sustaining. We have to go raise that every year. 200 employees, 500 student athletes. But what's really attractive besides managing all that is we also have $400 million in real estate assets that we manage that brings a profit to us every year. One of the unique universities that was out in the forefront of doing that. We own beds, we own restaurants, we own bars as a department that is giving us annual income to help fund our facilities, help fund everything that we're doing. And then in the last 5 years on top, we've done over $400 million in facility projects and going out and raising the money for that as well. So it's a unique position because that's what it was at Florida State, and they had the forefront to think about it. You see other schools modeling it right now. Wake Forest just did an entertainment district like we had built 7 years ago. You're looking at Tennessee's modeling one after what we've done 7 years ago. So that position is unique. What's also unique is my professional background. And 2.5 years ago, looking at the trends in collegiate athletics, when I first got hired 5 years ago, one of the first things I did within 2 weeks was bring in J.P. Morgan and Navigate Research to really outlay what we had and to outlay what the future of collegiate athletics was. So J.P. Morgan was great in sitting down and looking at private equity, looking at what the funds were going to be in the future and how we were going to make that transition. I do believe private equity has come into collegiate athletics. A story broke 2.5 years ago. Our project was called Project Osceola, where we were looking at how are we going to navigate this. We interviewed all the PE forums in sports. We finished with one, knowing we were going to get around third base and not finalize it until we saw what the House settlement was going to do and what the future, we predicted it, but we didn't want to get into private equity quite yet. That story broke that we were looking at, and everybody thought we were nuts. If you go back, the SEC commissioner, my good friend Greg Sankey, came out and said, "What are you doing?" But now what do you see? Big Ten's looking into private equity. SEC's looking into private equity. Big 12's looking into private equity, to how we're going to fund the future of college athletics. And that is what's so important. And we were on the forefront of that 2.5 years ago, and we're still talking to private equity about, can we pull that trigger if we need to? And what is that going to look like? So we've already negotiated the terms, we've negotiated the organization. We know what it's going to look like if we have to pull the trigger of looking at the transition and involvement of intercollegiate athletics and where it's going. So that's what makes this position unique at Florida State. I think we're ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve of others, of how we're looking at the future of this revenue. I mean, we're one of the top 10 branded, if you look at value of college sports, we're in the top 10 in worth, much like you were talking about the worth of the Cowboys. So it's important that we stay on the forefront and continue to look and be ahead of the curve when it comes to private equity and collegiate athletics.
Mike, really appreciate it. So comments and questions first for me, then we'll open it up. The commonality here is that 2001, Bob, is a big push to maximize revenue at the league level, obviously paying players and otherwise. And you start MLB Advanced Media in 2001. And the core of it is, how do you ratchet up value by using or looking at the media world to generate private investment, generate private equity? Mike talks about the real estate plays that he has. The one comment I just want to bring people back home is your Learfield deal, that's basically private equity today. So everybody making a big deal out of the pressure and stress to generate revenue and then create these newfangled worlds, but it's kind of an extension of the old world as it existed before. You've got to create some attractive assets so people are going to use money to invest in it potentially, right?
Yeah, there's no question that, and this was before it really was on the horizon, that MLB.com would have been a perfect spot. You know, the clubs invested about $125 million in getting it launched, and then 15 years later sold the non-baseball assets to Disney for $3.4 billion. And there would have been plenty of room for us to take on money and build it faster and perhaps even sell it faster. The issue with a league is there are not that many centralized items that would lend itself to that. We have MLB Properties, for example, which do the national sponsorships and the national advertising. But each club has its sort of own opportunity. I mean, I thought it was interesting, the Big Ten, it was talking, at least what I read, is talking about $2.5 billion and giving up 10% of their media and sponsorship rights across the entire conference. Hard for MLB to do that because they really can't give away the teams, local rights.
But universities / conferences potentially can put themselves in a position to do that if there's a stable revenue source that's effectively pledgeable and open to an investment community to do. I stole your thunder about Learfield, but you've been doing private equity for years. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, private equity is not new to collegiate sports. It hasn't been called private equity. You have companies, Learfield, and we bundle our multimedia rights. They come in and we share in the profits. They give you a check, we share in the profits. They have communication. They actually run that part of the business. It still goes on. So private equity collegiate athletics is not new. It's just called something different in multimedia rights. Now we're looking into bundling more of our rights, and that is something unique. There's a reason I questioned the conference on what our value was in the Atlantic Coast Conference, because when you look at who's driving the revenue in that conference, we were representing basically 20% of the media contract, and only getting 7% in return. I raised my hand and said, we need money, and that's not right. That we need to take a look at this. So we challenged the conference and settled it. Now anybody can get it. It's based on Nielsen ratings. And so any school within the conference can earn that, and it's really challenging the league too to also schedule better. Schedule the Alabamas, the LSUs, and grow our league and grow our brand. But all that was set up because one day we're going to be bundling our rights, in my belief. So we need to continue to grow our media value so that when bundle them and go out into the market, that it would be worth more. So it was really about challenging not only ourselves, but challenging the league to think a little different.
And to toot his horn for the FSU guys, this is not a legal lecture, but remember FSU and Clemson challenged the ACC structure. And
Well, they followed us.
FSU led the brilliant minds, and then Clemson kind of got itself out of the ditch and found its way to the dentist and followed. So at the end of the day, the ability to combine a guaranteed revenue stream with some incentives based on individual performance is now the carrying of the day. The net result is that if you wanted to go to a potential equity partner, you could say, we can count on this share, but if we can increase this together, you could be part of that return on investment as well?
100%. You look at your keggers, you're looking at your waterfalls, and that's something we have worked really hard on and still working with JP Morgan on. I have our budgets set up with trends and different tipping points within our industry that's coming up all the way to 2046. We have established budgets and could pull the lever on different elements within that depending on what happens within our industry. So working with professionals such as JP Morgan and people in this room, it really allows us to forecast our future and make decisions now that's going to make the best for Florida State moving forward.
Can you keep Castellanos in school until 2046?
We're trying.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
I mean,
Go.
that's one place where the professional leagues do have an advantage. Take the NFL, for example. They could bundle their international package and which covers the entire league and create a separate entity for their international growth, expansion, and games, and sell off pieces of that and make it its own profit center. Harder to do when you're a college conference.
Well, and I'll go one step further as far as creativity. When I was doing NFL stuff, we had what's called the G3 resolution, which is a very interesting concept of teams agreeing to take a certain percentage of their PSL/Skybox revenues and pledge them in a stadium fund and make that stadium fund available to the Bengals and to some of the other socialistic teams that weren't able to raise a lot of revenue themselves, and use that in the context of saying to the public sector, here is an NFL investment, now go get private funds. Which leads me to a question. Most of the stadium development stuff is driven at the team level with some league help. The opportunity to create private equity opportunities, especially in the next round of stadiums, whose current leases effectively expire after 25 years when they were originally done in the late 90s.
At least for baseball.
At least for
21 stadia were built between the late 90s and the early aughts, and they are all now in a position where they need rehab or complete reconstruction. But the bigger opportunity, I think, is in the battery-like complexes that have grown up around those ballparks, the entertainment districts, and that too could be bundled.
Well, and the bundling opportunity is a private equity real estate play, and I assume when you were doing Doe Campbell, and remember the number was $265 million, the opportunity to bring in as many outside real estate pieces. You talked about owning bars and beds and all, and bundle that into your asset package so it looked more familiar to investors was on the table.
Yeah, and it was about growth. We have an area called College Town that's truly amazing, and we were ahead, like the Battery, we were kind of ahead of that in college sports. But being able to have that asset, but also grow what we're doing. We did a $265 million project. We were looking at it economically. We were $13 million behind the average SEC school and stadium revenue and $9 million behind the average Big Ten. We haven't done any facility projects to Doak Campbell. It was 73-year stadium. It only had bleacher seats, a couple of club seats, and 97 suites. Now we're at 108 suites. We got 8 founder suites that are 30 yards off the field. They were $5 million up front, and they're 1,100 square feet. We have club, and we have about 15 different price points now within the stadium, and it's generating an additional $12 million a year for us. to go out and compete. When I first became AD, our budget was $140 million. We're now at 220 within 5 years. And all of that is going out and, one, raising funds and sharing a vision, but also doing these equity plays to grow our assets of how we can do and really bring new revenue streams into our portfolio.
23-second question, 47 seconds each answer to you guys, then we'll open it up for one question from you. Guardrails on the future of equity. First, Bob, Arcos, I guess there's a multiple opportunity. The NFL to buy equity positions in more than one team.
Every league.
Every league. Good thing, bad thing. How do you prevent foul play, divergent allegiances in the future? And where's the business going in the next 5 years? You got 42 seconds.
I don't need 42 seconds. I think it's a good thing, and I think the only issue is, though, that then you have to keep it passive. You can't have them in controlling the operation of the team. If you want to do that, then you've got to limit it to one per club.
So the haves and the have-nots, you become a have, congratulations, but you become a have because you scratch and claw. The SEC is a poster child of all haves. Even Vanderbilt now has become a dynamic program, as we know. How do we guard against this equity train becoming just another example of how Kentucky, Duke, et cetera, dominate basketball recruiting, and how Ohio State and everybody else dominates football recruiting, and on, and where's the industry in 5 years? 42 seconds.
Yeah, in 5 years, I believe it's going to continue to grow. You're going to continue to see revenues come up. What's really going to be interesting, and really how we're positioning everything, is 2030, you have TV contracts coming up again. And that's where you're seeing the industry really start to play and leverage themselves of who's going to be who's going to be partnering with who. And that is all going on because you have a TV contract in 2030, 2032, and 2034 all coming up. So you're starting to see some jockeying and positioning behind closed doors now of what is that going to look like. And that is really what everyone is gearing up for within our industry to see, because I think some of those contracts are going to break records.
By the way, you hear Alford now. That's 7 years from now. He's got diagrams back on his desk about what to do about that stuff this afternoon. So it's not as if he's waiting. One question.
Yes, I would like to know, what would it mean to a sports team if they were able to get their own media distribution globally? How much value would they put on that?
Media distribution company?
Media distribution globally.
Bob?
At least from baseball standpoint, every team has a prescribed territory, and they do control that locally. The jewels are sold nationally, and so are Sunday night baseball, et cetera, Sunday night football. But teams do have that, at least baseball, basketball, and hockey.
Well, they actually have to work it out with the network, and they only get a certain percentage. What my question is, if they were able to get bandwidth on satellites so that they can be distributed at their control globally, how much value would that be for them?
It would have some value, but it would ruin competitive balance because you would have the major markets dominate even more than they do now.
Well, that's well put. And give us the college perspective.
Yes, and very interesting question, because when I was at the University of Southern California, we did go down south and opened up some of our third-party rights and looked to distribute them within Mexico, and we did some broadcast deals into Mexico and trying to gain that market share. A little bit different rules. In college, you can do whatever you want. We're not, and like the NFL, you're kind of sidelined like baseball of what you're allowed to do. In our market, it's kind of free reign. You can grow your media rights, your third-party tier rights, and go and distribute those anywhere.
Before we say goodbye, I will tell you that this is a seminal moment, because every time I talk to John, who's a credible founder of this, the planning was, if you go over 30 minutes, I'm going to kill you. Now he's just said one more question. So a victory for the home team, because of sports and the $1.4 billion industry. I'll be there at the reception this evening. There are a lot more issues, I'm sure. Yeah, but this is I'm filibustering now, okay? All right? Filibustering. One more question. Then his parking meter expired, by the way, so he's got...
Hey,
Go.
my name is Mike Klauser. I do sports and business law. So I don't like to call myself an agent, but I am. Question, I know you're saying amateur professional. We're kind of both professional now here with the college and the pro sports. But two quick questions. One is private equity. Here's like Howard University is talking about selling off their basketball team to private equity. Sort of have some questions around that, if that's something that's going to take any...
I wouldn't say you're selling off your team. You are going to sell off your media rights.
I'm sorry, yeah. But I mean, is that something you think is going to continue with other...
I think that you're going to continue to look at it as you see the Big Ten and the SEC. We're prepared to pull the lever whenever we want.
Yeah.
Still in discussions with private equity about what is right and do we need to remodel it. I think the future of collegiate sports, I think private equity will have a part of it because as you look at it, moving forward, those media contracts and the ability to bundle, much like you do in the Premier Leagues and everything else, it's just going to be too much revenue there. Too much opportunity to grow and to bring in some different perspectives. As the CAGRs keep going up and being self-sustaining, we have to keep finding new revenue streams because it's not going down.
Yeah, and that's the other thing.
And then give Bob the last question because and it come from you. He feels a little emotionally incomplete if he doesn't answer questions.
Bob's a legend, man. I got to say, he's best in the business. I really focus on the NIL stuff, though. Do you mind, Bob? I'll get you a drink later. But the NIL, so where do you see that headed? I mean, there's a lot of legislation. There's no salary cap anybody's talking about. I got a couple of good 5 stars that are in the portal if you guys are interested. But where do you see that going?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough in 2019. All the athletic directors came in the country and said, because of my pro experience, and with the Cowboys and Mr. Jones, it was, hey, you need to lead this NIL. So we put together basically what we're doing now. Went to the NCAA in 2019, said we want registration of agents, we want third-party administrator looking at every agreement. It's got to go through a system. It's got to get approved. A lot of guardrails. Basically took the NFLPA and collegialized it. And they said, we can't do that, we'll get sued. I said, you're going to get sued anyway. We have to. That led to the Wild West that we're coming out of. I am a believer in what we're doing now because it's the same thing we presented in 19. The only thing that we're doing not doing now that I'm working on very hard with College Sports Commission is the registration of agents. We don't have that in college sports, and that's something that needs to be done. But you're looking at Deloitte, who is our third-party administrator, who is evaluating every agreement. We just hired Brian Seeley from Major League Baseball to be our head of enforcement and investigation, who also went and ran all the investigations in Major League Baseball. So we have got it set up. We do have a rev cap, $20.5 million this year, that we are distributing, and I am all for that. The 22% of our media contracts now go to the players. 100% in favor of that, and it goes up 4% every year. It's about having Brian come in and really set up the rules to make sure that we're following and abiding by them. But our contracts are now, as an agent, it was brand new. Our contracts are now 27 pages long. I mean, it's my professional sports background. Yeah.
Bob, last word. You want a last word? No.
Good. As a youth college sports, the one and done portal really make you have to be a fan of the laundry, and I wish that the athletes would stay their full 4 years and get the benefit.
That was great. By the way, I have one comment. You all sports fans, sometime seen the Capital One commercial with Derek Jeter and the person who the astronaut. So the kids are there, and Derek Jeter is going to be asked questions, and the girl comes up and says, "No, I want the Capital One guy to answer it." And all of a sudden, the guys are quiet, the guys that should be answering it. Anyway, I apologize for monopolizing. You'll know why that is. John, you guys are great. See you guys later on this evening, and thank you all very much.